Deepak Singh, welcome to this presentation. Is Arvind Kejriwal the virus that's going to destroy India? I'm afraid the answer to that question seems to be yes. In this presentation, I'm going to tell you why I think so and how that might happen. Let me start with a Mark Twain famous quote that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Now, as you can see on the screen, that there is a Venezuela and India. And you must be wondering what has Kejriwal and virus to do with Venezuela and India? Well, let me share you a very fascinating story. Venezuela is a country in Latin America, South America, pretty rich in oil. I think blessed. And there is a very interesting history of this country, and what's the best part is that you can relate it to when you think of India. Now, there was a long period of time when there was a dictatorship rule from 1830 to 1958. You can equate it with British colonial rule if you're comparing with India. And then the transition to democracy happened in 1958 in Venezuela. And two political parties called Social Democratic Party, you can call it the Congress, and the Christian Democrats, you can call it a BJP, were contesting for the power. And for next 40 years, between 58 and 98, three times Social Democratic Party was in power and two times Christian Democrats in power. And they were running a pretty closed economy since the country was already blessed with, lots of oil. They hadn't to do much, just sell the oil, get the money, and throw the tolls. And then there was rampant corruption, crony capitalism, you name it. Everything was bad. But as long as the price of oil was high, things were okay. But when the Middle East conflict ended in 80s, the price of oil internationally started coming down, and that's when it hit the Venezuela very hard because Venezuela didn't had anything else. I mean, the 95% of the export earnings were coming from the oil. And so when the declining trend of oil prices and the spiking inflation and joblessness and rising poverty, it created an enormous social unrest in Venezuela. And that's what was called as the crisis of governance. And a new movement started there, a revolt by the military and the emergence of Hugo Chavez, which I call the Kejriwal of Venezuela. Now, he's also started a movement like India against corruption there in 92. Then people advised him to join politics, and then he fought elections in 1998. And here comes the amazing coincidence. He started as anti-politics. Then he won the elections in 1998 on December 6th, and in India, Kejriwal, the counting day was December 8th. So pretty amazing similarity. Hugo Chavez was just 44 years when he became president. Kejriwal is 44, 45. He came on the plank to end corruption and dream of a country free of poverty, and his victory was seen as a triumph of anti-politics. Everything applies to Kejriwal. And the middle class of Venezuela was so disgusted with that regime that they saw him as a messiah. And he also started with the same rhetoric. I'm here, not here for power. I'm the revolutionary, meri kya auqat hai, and I'm here to change the country. And whoever is not with me is the agent of corrupt people. And for Venezuela, since the oil was the main thing, oil was the main industry, and there were a lot of American oil companies involved, so everything was blamed on corrupt America, right? So anybody who is not with Hugo Chavez is with the corrupt America. So it's like anybody who's not with Kejriwal is with corrupt people in India. That's the kind of same rhetoric that's there. Uh, you, that's another thing. He was the man of television, like Kejriwal. Chavez used to had a weekly television show called Hello Presidente. He was in TV for equivalent of 50 full days during his presidency. So he was practically on TV every day, all the time, right? And this is like he was there on the television, and then you forget about the repeat telecast and the other stuff. And he used those programs to abuse people, mock people, insult people, and he radicalized the society by talking about all sorts of conspiracy theories that Jesus was with us and America is the most evil country in the world, and if your life is miserable it's because of America. And then he would announce his populist schemes, sack people, arrest businessmen, nationalize private companies. He used to do all that kind of things, and people used to clap and say, wow, what a great man. This. Just like what how people respond to Kejriwal nowadays, especially the people who are infected with the virus called the Kejriwal. And the same thing, sab chor hai, and everyone is the agent of America, and whoever is not with Hugo Chavez is the enemy of the state and is doing the betrayal of the country. And with this, he pushed the system, and these supporters were so brainwashed, so abusive that they every dissenting voice, people who had a dissenting voice either left the country or they became the second great citizen in Venezuela. And that is why I get more scared when I see those radicalized ARP supporters, because I see a similar trend or similar pattern here. Again, a very amazing similarity. Hugo Chavez said this democracy is a sham, all this representative democracy and capitalism. It should be participative democracy. What is a participative? That the kind of cup type thing that people will decide what is good for their neighbor and locality. And do you know what this experimented resulted in Venezuela? That all these workers, political party workers, they started dominating these all these cops, and they started furthering the agenda of the government in these local areas, and all the dissenting voices were crushed, and they kind of became the rulers in these local areas, and the and they started furthering their own political agenda in their local areas, and the rule of law was thrown out of the window and individual liberties totally crushed. Now that's what the participatory democracy did, and I'm 100% certain that's what participatory democracy is going to do in, by this all this nonsense of Kejriwal. Now, what he did as a president. So when he became the president, he realized, since he was an outsider, that even after becoming president, he has no control in the oil, because there were other institutions of democracy on which he didn't have the power. So he tried to take control of it through various means, but the existing system was strong, and so he was thrown out. And and uh, and then he came back strongly because he then abused and mocked them pretty viciously, and people thought, no, Hugo Chavez is right. Like today, people say, no, Kejriwal is right. He is saying the right thing. All these, Ambanis and all these guys, everybody is thug. This guy is Kejriwal is right. The same thing Hugo Chavez did. Now, here's a very interesting chart. What you see now, here's a country which exports oil. That means that every time it exports a barrel of oil, it earns foreign exchange. So every time the production goes down, it loses that precious foreign exchange. Now look at the chart on the screen, and you see that how consistently the oil production is declined in Venezuela. And the reason is very simple. There has been no private investment after the nationalization and the total control of Hugo Chavez. And today, that country is struggling because the oil prices are going down and the country cannot produce more oil, right? And the cost of producing oil has gone up because wages have risen because of so much of inflation is there in Venezuela, that it's hardly able, to meet its expenses. And what's worse is that it says, when the Hugo Chavez says, this is your oil, right? The oil is the country's oil, this is your oil, so luto. And so in Venezuela, you can get the world's cheapest oil. Now remember, every time they export oil, they make money, right? So if you waste that oil by giving it free to your public, so they are not going to value it. The use will be not efficient. People will use fuel guzzling vehicles, and nobody will maintain it. And that's precisely what happened. And today, it's so ironic that you you don't get milk in Venezuela, but the oil is free, right? You can get oil in a country where the population is like 29, 30 million. um, Only 779 cars were sold, 722 cars were sold, vehicles were sold last month, right? So there is oil, but there is no incentive to make vehicles by the businesses. Then, as the Mr. Hugo Chavez was ruling, the electricity prices were going up. Like, Kejriwal saw that this thing, and he said that these guys are evil, so let's nationalize the these power companies. And he nationalized the power companies, and he said that there will be no increase in electricity prices. So what has happened is, in a country where inflation is 50%, 60% consistently for for last 4 or 5 years, so electricity is turning cheaper because there has been no increase in the electricity rates. People virtually pay like $1 for that minimum use, so nobody even turns off the light. And what has happened? The It is in deep loss. There is a huge debt on the power company. The power company is not making enough money to even pay wages. Forget about maintenance and investment in the grid. The blackouts have been become rampant. Now people don't get power. So it's the same script. People know it, and when hear people say it, they are called no. Kejriwal is a smart guy. He is very intelligent. Yeah, this is what happens. One of the important things in policy making is that you should always see that there should be reference point in the history that when somebody does this kind of thing, what eventually happens, right? So before you clap, you should know that if you take this route, this is where you will land up. So yeah, I mean, you can get a free electricity and you don't pay any money, but when eventually there will be no electricity, because there is no money left with the company to invest and upgrade. And without investments and upgrades, things quickly deteriorate and go out of hand. So, poor people can clap all that they much want, and even bright people can clap as an ARP supporter, but that's what the country will eventually head to. Then Hugo Chavez became the job and the food provider. Everybody started working for government, and he promised more jobs from the government. We started some innovative schemes, Motherhood Neighborhood Mission, and gave free doles like $280 a month, a cash benefit, and handouts. There were state-run grocery stores where things were like 50%, 60% cheaper than what private parties can sell. So there was no incentive for the private parties to sell, right? If let's say something is selling 70% cheap, why will somebody make and sell it at a 70% expense? He will not make it. He will eventually stop it. And so what happens? There will be your domestic production will decline, and then you will have to eventually import everything and sell at subsidized rate, right? And then the population, if it gets everything free, it has no incentive to work, right? Because I'm getting everything free and subsidized. Then on top of that, the Hugo Chavez and this government was so anti-business that, and on the first whim, oh, these guys are corrupt, they're increasing prices, they're greedy, let's nationalize them. They implemented the concept of fixed profit. So your profit margin is fixed. Anything you want to earn more than that, you're a greedy person, will nationalize it, will lock you behind the bars. Now, who wants to go to jail? Why will anybody do business? And so as a result, the domestic industry collapsed slowly, slowly, slowly. They collapsed. The numbers went on going smaller, 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 and they are now almost on the verge of extinction. So what happens? Where is Venezuela today? I mean, it must be heaven, right? I mean, for all the ARP supporters, because this government, Hugo Chavez was not corrupt. I mean, he was the super honest guy. And there's a very interesting description I picked up from the web. which says that there is no milk in the clubs, right? Anywhere there's no milk, there's no light in the house, no power, the water doesn't come. In the grocery stores, there is shortage, so you don't get it. Inflation is running at 50% and people have moved out of the country. So you have to stand in queue for 5 hours to get a bottle of milk, right? Wow. I'm so excited to see this government in India, right? Where people have to wait in queue for 5 hours to get a bottle of milk. And this is how people spend the day. Stand in queues to get the basic necessities of life. And what happens when life becomes miserable? People become animal. The homicide rate, like per 100,000, was 19 in 1998. Today, it is 79. And this also includes a large part of political killings because when society gets radicalized, people don't listen to dissenting voices, and what do? They kill the other person. And then when there's shortage, people loot, all that kind of things happen. So that's what happens to a dream society which is being painted by the Arvind Kejriwal. And what is the government response? The government continues to blame America for the mess that the Venezuela is in, right? They are the masters of conspiracy theory. So when electricity rates go down, they will expel the US diplomats, and arrest some Western countries' officials saying they were the ones who sabotaged. Why I use the term virus? Because when I see what has happened to the Venezuela, and by now you must have seen that how amazing the similarity in the line of thinking of the Arvind Kejriwal is. And what hurts me the most is when I see the bright young minds of India infected by this virus. I see very little hope in our country. And here's my small suggestion for all the people who are very excited with ideology. They should be transported, they should be asked to go to Venezuela and stay there for 6 months. And then they will understand that, you know, that where Kejriwal virus is taking the country to. There is no corruption in Venezuela. There is only misery, right? And that's why, you know, my political vote is for Narendra Modi because he believes in getting the job done, create opportunities, create increase supply so that people can afford everything and things are in hands of people. We do not want a leader like Manmohan Singh who always found excuses for why things are not getting done to a leader like Kejriwal, who does not need to find excuses. He can just blame anybody, and you'll have to believe it, right? Everybody is chore, everybody is thug, and हम देश बदलने आए हैं, हम तो ये नहीं है. I mean, the way he talks is so full of himself, and I feel sorry for people who get inspired by such kind of crazy nut. I mean, but anyway, when people have right to be inspired by anyone. My objective of making this presentation was to highlight that which dangerous path the country can be on if we get infected by this virus. In a fight against corruption, it is easy to lose focus. The main point is to get the job done. I hope you found my presentation useful. You can send me your feedback to deepaksingh@gmail.com. I have not exaggerated in my presentation. I have just put across very simply that what has happened in Venezuela, a very similar thing is happening in India, and for God's sake, we should not take that road. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye for now. My Twitter ID is smarket, and you can send me your feedback at 2deepaksingh@gmail.com. Thank you.